We're going to look at some of the things that we find in one of the books in the Old Testament, one of the books of prophecy, or one of the books of the prophets, I should say. And it's the book of Daniel. And we're going to look at the first chapter. I'm going to give you just a quick synopsis of that chapter, and then I'm going to read it to you. So listen as we go. This first chapter in Daniel tells us of Daniel and three of his friends that were taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar from Judah into Babylon. And they were, all four of them, and countless others, no doubt, that according to the text, they were all young men, so they were in their early to mid-teens, probably maybe approaching their early 20s. And these men, they grew up in Judah about 700 years before Christ is the time frame that we're in. And you can, from the text, we can see, in understanding some of the other background from these Old Testament books, we can quickly see that they learned from a very young age who God is and what it meant to live faithfully to Him. Now, Babylon enters into the picture here at the very beginning of the chapter. And Babylon is the mightiest world power of that day. They were taking nations captive left and right as they were going on various campaigns for world domination, and Judah was one of the kingdoms that came under their dominion from that campaign of domination. Babylon, when they came to Judah and they defeated it, they came into the land and they sought out the young, strong, and intelligent males that they would take with them back to the city of Babylon. And when they got them there, we see that they would train them, they would condition them, and really what they were doing is they were indoctrinating them, all of them, these young men, to use them in the government and the leadership of Babylon. And one of the things that we can see in this text is that Babylon sought to strip these young men of allegiance to their homelands by confusing their identity. And they did this by giving them new names and changing things so simple as their diet, but also introducing to them education and teaching them new languages. And it was a powerful tactic. Very, very effective, no doubt. They continued to do it because it worked for the purposes that they were using it. But you'll see in this chapter that four young men, and actually through the whole of the book of Daniel, you kind of see the result of these four young men that were unshakable. That in the midst of this captivity, in the midst of this being sent to the Babylonian university, to being taught the language that they spoke there, being taught how to write it, how to communicate in it, being given, or at least they tried to give them a new diet, being given new names, which there's some interesting details about the names that would be really, really fun to talk about, but I don't want to get into those details today because it's not really the point. But these four men in particular were seen to be unshakable, holding fast to their integrity and clinging firmly to the identity that they had in the Lord. And so with these just quick, fast fact type details that I've given you, I want you to listen for the demonstration of this integrity by Daniel and his friends as I read to you the first chapter of Daniel. Now, I know that this is a long one, reading a whole chapter, and so I will, of course, allow you whatever you need, but I would invite you to stand together as we turn to Daniel chapter 1 and we read the Word of God together. Beginning in Daniel chapter 1 in the first verse, it says, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge and understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you. And deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 youth, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired with them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. You can go ahead and have a seat. Now, I think obviously that's a lot of words. But I think that we can spend some time in that passage, perhaps, through this week, spend some time looking through this. And you can see the demonstration of integrity and a commitment to the true identity that Daniel and his companions had. Now, I'm going to share with you, kind of take a little bit of a shift of gears here. I'm going to share with you some experiences that I had recently, because I spent this past week with a group of young men and women. Many of them were at the age Daniel and his friends were when they were thrown into the cultural confusion that was the kingdom of Babylon. And in many ways, we can or we should all sympathize with our teens, our young people today. Because when we consider the cultural confusion that they're exposed to just at their fingertips, just the cultural confusion that comes from one of these little fellas, this thing right here, glowing up at them daily. And it's not just in their phones, but it's everything. Everything today is confusion. Even in small town USA, want as we are to ignore it or to deny it, we're faced with confusion of all sorts every day. But experiences like this past week, a week that I spent away as a counselor at Whitehall Senior High Youth Camp, these experiences can be such a refuge for Christian teens. It can and was for me an opportunity to be given an incredible reminder of what our young people are facing and the faith to which some of them are striving to cling. And I'm going to share with you just a little bit of that experience. It's probably going to be an abbreviated service, though I say that now. You know how that always goes, but I say that now. And I want to have you turn to another passage of Scripture, and I'll read it to you. I won't make you stand back up, but I'll just read it to you. And it was the guiding Scripture for this week, this past week, and it will be for the next 2 weeks. This past week was Senior High Youth Camp. Starting this afternoon will be the Junior High Youth Camp, and the next Sunday will be the elementary age youth camp. And it's kind of cool. I just had this revelation, this realization. I was there as a counselor this past week. This coming week, Barb Schaefer is going to be there as the nurse, the camp nurse, so she's going to be there all week with them. And then the week after that, our very own Brittany Smith is going to be there, being the one that speaks to them in their evening worship services for the kids. And so we have an opportunity each of these weeks that's a little bit unique. And I just had that realization right now, and it's suddenly something that's rather exciting. But the passage, the verse specifically that they gave as the focus for these 3 weeks this year for summer camp is 2 Corinthians 3:18. And it says, we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of God, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. And this is more, I guess, I gave you the context, a little bit of kind of provoking some thought there with the introduction to the book of Daniel, the first chapter of Daniel, the circumstance that they were in. I believe very strongly that though that's talking about some 2,800 years ago, that the cultural issues, though they may be somewhat different in their specific details, the cultural issues are just as huge, and the influence of culture on our young people is just as powerful. And I present to you Daniel just to kind of draw your attention to that, and then take this time to share basically a testimony of the experience of that time spent with them, and just try and go through just talking about some of the things that I witnessed, some of the things that I experienced with some of those teens, young adults. Some of them were high school graduates. It's the last time that they would come to summer camp like that. But I'll tell you, I never, for whatever reason, I honestly don't know why, I didn't do the senior high camp. Truthfully, in recollection, I'm pretty sure that I didn't realize that was a thing. I thought that Whitehall camp was the camp meeting week. I didn't realize that there were other things going on whenever I was in school. I don't know. Okay, I'm pretty sure it has to do with the fact that I had more important things going on whenever our youth pastor told us about what opportunities we had to do stuff, right? But in all reality, I just don't remember it being something that was happening. But I know it was. But the setting of youth camp, and I don't have any experience apart from the past 2 years being a counselor with the senior high group, it's a really unique setting, different even from the state youth conventions or the international youth convention or the overnighter experiences or the weekend retreats, those kinds of things. It's a unique setting. It was unique for me. Certainly, it was better this year because I knew what to expect. Last year was completely blindsided, but it's a unique setting because there's a group of, not quite this year, 100 teenagers from across the state of Pennsylvania, part of the Church of God, some of them outside the Church of God, others coming from slightly different backgrounds, different life experiences, different circumstances, and they all come together into one place and are given the opportunity to just be present together in a place where they're encouraged to worship, and they share in some kind of intentional and focused discipleship. They're given opportunities to play games and to engage in activities of various kinds, engage in devotions, eat ice cream, eat camp food, which I'm happy to be home. It's a unique setting, and it's at first thought, the idea of me at the stage of life that I'm in, sleeping on what I can only describe as a prison mattress on a shapeless spring-style bunk bed with a bunch of teenage boys in a single room with no air conditioner, no ventilation, and everything that entails, is not exactly what you would classify as a positive experience. But it was unique. I mean, in a lot of different ways, but it was unique. But it was unique in a good way. Because there were opportunities that were presented over that past week with people that I otherwise would probably never have gotten an opportunity to interact with. And things that we would probably never have been given the opportunity to discuss. And experiences of shared worship together that would otherwise probably have never come to be. And to get to see the thought processes of some young people as they're dealing with what the world has to throw at them, and they're working through the things that they're witnessing and trying to make sense of it all in the midst of what they're being told at youth camp, and in church, and at home, and in school, and all of the different places that they are. Sitting on the they're porch swings, but they're not on a porch, so I don't know what to call them. They're these swing benches that there's 4 of them all facing inward, and talking to teenagers, silly questions like, what's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? If you could go anywhere for vacation, you leave tomorrow, money is no object, and you can take anybody with you, where would you go? What's your favorite type of shoe? Like these kinds of silly questions that were serving a really great purpose of icebreakers with people who would otherwise probably not talk to me. Because I learned something this weekend, by the way, or this past week, is apparently I have a really intense facial expression. One particular time I walked from outside the dining hall into the dining hall and stopped maybe 2 steps in the door and was looking around. And one of the other counselors said, "Are you looking for somebody to punch?" I'm like, no, I'm happy to be here. I had no idea. So, as an aside, if that's the impression of my expression, that's not what it is. If I wanted to punch you, you'd probably know. With them, getting to know them a little bit more, where they're at in life. Talking to a couple of young ladies whose parents are currently in Ukraine as missionaries. They had been with them until, the war broke out and escalated and they were sent home, and listening to some of the things that they had experienced and that they were dealing with, or some teens dealing with various stages of family dysfunction, or dealing with just many other kinds of things. Getting to see what their life experiences have been and what kind of things that they're bringing with them to a place like Whitehall Senior High Youth Camp. And then getting to share with them, in spite of all of those things, all of us carry the various things that we deal with, the struggles that we have, the burdens that we're underneath, but getting to share with them nonetheless worship services, seeing teenagers who are willing to raise their hands and cry as they worship because they're so happy to be there and to be able to sing and to be able to worship together. And even if they don't fully understand some of the implications of things, which I am inclined to give them more credit than that, getting to witness that and to share in that. And then getting to listen to the message together, the speaker for the week. And then after the service, we would sit down with what was called our family groups, which is they just divide the kids up into groups. And then there's a girl component and a guy component. And the counselors from those groups would sit down with the teens and just kind of discuss the things that were going on for the week and the content of the message for the night, and kind of just some of the perspective that they were gaining, and maybe questions that they had, and being pleasantly shocked at some of the depth of thought. I mean, there was a number of them that were able to recall something that was said last year from the speaker. One of those night services. I remembered it because it was deeply impactful for me, and I've referenced it a number of times with you. But I asked them, I said, "Do you remember what she said about this?" And the one flipped open, this is amazing, flipped open a notebook and started leafing through pages. "It's in here, I know it's in here." And then the other said, "I do." And she said it from memory. And just the amazing the amazing testimony to the importance of the time spent pouring into the lives and the hearts and the minds, and the bolstering up and building up of the faith of young people that can sometimes seem like you're not really getting anywhere. All of a sudden, something like that, where you ask a question not expecting to get an answer, and you get the exact answer that you were looking for from more than one person. It was shocking. And then, of course, I talked about the social interactions. Sitting on the swings, or playing dodgeball at literally 1:45. Chasing, this was a fun one. The one night game that they played, we were wearing dark clothing, and the adults had a length of pantyhose filled with a big old portion of cornstarch. And we got to chase teenagers around in the dark and beat them with a piece of pantyhose full of cornstarch. I was given permission. And the night before, I was given permission to chase them around and beat them with a pool noodle. But the first time in my 34 years, I pulled a hamstring chasing a teenager with a piece of pantyhose full of cornstarch. So, yeah. But all of those things, you get to see, you get to learn things about these teenagers and share and experiences and listen and be shocked at some of the things that they retain, some of the thoughts that they have, some of the burdens that they carry, and the fact that, you know, they're oftentimes not given the credit for how they think and how they view the world, and the depth of their thought, and maybe the understanding that they have that we don't realize. And I was drawn to continually reflect upon the verse that was chosen as the guiding scripture for this year. And it's a real experience for me as the teens and the counselors and the staff spent this week together worshiping and praying and goofing off and sharing meals and playing games and whatever else it was that we were doing. What I witnessed was the reality of what's talked about in 2 Corinthians 3:18, the unveiled faces of young men and women who had and were continuing to encounter the risen Christ in their lives. And what I saw this week, much like the week that I spent with them last year, and then the summer before that when I was blessed to share in the experience of the International Youth Convention, was the kindling flame of faith in the hearts of young people. And what I saw in them was a desire for genuine faith, a desire for genuine and true worship, and a desire for genuine and true and meaningful Christian fellowship. Not all of them, right? Some of them were just there because, you know, there was a cute girl from the youth group that decided to go, and they thought, man, this is my shot. They're going to be there for a week with no escape. Maybe I'll get my chance. But most of them were there for the right reasons, right? And what I saw makes my prayer is that they stay faithful and focused, so that they can not just remember what they experienced, but that they can keep a hold of what it is that God has given to them. And also that they can grow with the continuing work of Christ and His people by the Holy Spirit of God. You see, just like in the historical account of Daniel and his three companions, our young people today are living in a worldly culture that seeks to strip them of their true identity and then instill upon them its own. And it's everywhere. It's everywhere. I mean, social media is one of these amazing and terrible things. It gives us access to incredible, interesting video clips of people doing wheelies on Harley Davidson motorcycles, but it also gives us snippets of what the world is telling us we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to pursue, what it means to be a decent person, what morality is, what integrity is, what tolerance is, all of those things. And they're inundated with that. Like I said, it glows up at them every time they look at it. And for every good thing that they see, and there are good things, I follow a guy on Facebook and Instagram named Shane Pruitt. He's a Christian pastor, minister about my age, maybe a little bit older. Does a lot of work with high school and college age people. And he shared a post yesterday from a conference that he was doing and talked about how the service last night ended with them walking with 31 teenagers, young adults who gave their lives over to the Lord. That's something that I wouldn't have been aware of if it wasn't for social media. But I also would probably have no clue who the likes of Kim Kardashian and Cardi B are if it wasn't for social media and the influences that they exercise on the minds of young people and adults Those of you that have figured out how to use social media, at least. See, just like Daniel and Daniel and Mishael and Azariah and Hananiah, our young people today are living in a culture of confusion that is seeking to take from them their true identity. And to be completely honest, there is no amount of argument from any person, from any perspective, that could change my conviction on this. It's a reality that we can look around and we can see. And what we need is to help them seek, and perhaps for many of us, we need to seek it ourselves, how it is that we're to live in this world without living for this world. See, that's one of the things that we see about Daniel and Mishael and Hananiah and Azariah is they were living in Babylon. They were living in that university. They were learning the language of the Chaldeans. They didn't eat the food, right? They didn't drink the wine. But they were there. They were part of that culture. They were in that culture. They were doing what they needed to do to be in that culture. But when you look at their lives and the testimony of their lives and their faithfulness to what it was that they were brought up in, they weren't living for Babylon. They were living for their God in the midst of Babylon. And what I saw with these young men and women last week was a clear desire that many of them had to live for Christ. And I think the thing that they need, maybe the most that they need, is to be shown what it means to live in the world but not for it. And that's a simple concept that's incredibly complicated in terms of actually living it out. You know, I think that Daniel and Mishael and Hananiah and Azariah were probably heavily influenced by the faithfulness of their fathers. Unfortunately, today there's a lot of young people who don't have their fathers in the picture. But one of the things that we can do for those young people is be what they need, even if we're not their daddy. And I think that that's one of the things that I saw and I witnessed, part of it anyway, last week with some of these teens is they were drawn. I mean, I don't know, I was the only counselor that actually yelled. If that's surprising, let's get to know each other a little bit better. But they needed, and I'm not saying that it was the right thing to do, though circumstantially, a teenager picking up a snapping turtle and thinking that's a good idea, they need to be yelled at because that's dumb. It's not going to end well. But they need that. They need to understand, just like Daniel and his companions, what is the true and good and right and pure way to live. What it is that is the basis for their true identity, not the identity of the world, not the image that the world would cast upon them, but who they really are. And so I guess the question I'll present to you this morning has to do with that thought. If your life was to be the only example for the young people that you know, would they be given an example of how to live in the world or for the world? If your life was the only example for the young people that you know, would they be given an example of how to live in the world or for the world? You see, in the world but not for the world is what we're called to. And it is actually for this very distinct purpose of holy living that Christ himself prayed for his disciples and for us in John's gospel account. In the 17th chapter, where the chapter is titled the High Priestly Prayer, we read of 4 verses. Beginning in verse 14, it says, Jesus is praying these words to God, I have given them your word, and the world hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. Set them apart in the truth. Consecrate them in the truth. I'm going to invite the praise team to come up as I wrap up this time. I could probably talk some more about specific experiences, some of the interactions, some of the things that we talked about, some of the experiences that we shared. But I think that instead we're going to spend some time as we're singing this closing song. We're going to spend some time praying. And I'm going to invite you to come and present yourself to God this morning. I'm going to charge you to maybe come to the altar and allow yourself to be searched. And if you do, I would encourage you to ask Him to sift your heart and to reveal who or what it is that you're living for. I would also ask you to spend some time in prayer for the teens that I was with last week. You don't know their names, or you don't know most of their names, maybe, but you can still pray for them. You can pray for the junior high students that are getting there this afternoon and will be there all week. You can pray for the elementary school kids that are going to be there the week after. You can pray for the kids that are going to be in this very room starting tomorrow at 6:30 all week, singing songs, hearing lessons, seeing the example of the people that have committed their time that they really probably don't have an abundance of to be here and to pour into their lives. You can pray for those people. But I think, or for those young people specifically, but I think that it would do a great benefit to all of us to present ourselves to God and allow Him to search us and to ask Him to do so. And then to respond to what it is that God reveals to us about what He finds there. So they're going to sing. I invite you to stand. If you want to be prayed with, come to this side. If you want to pray alone, come to this side. But if the Lord is in any way tugging at your heart, the step out of the pew into the aisle is probably the hardest one that you'll make in obedience to that call to come to Him to the altar. If you make it, you'll be amazed at what He does when you meet Him there.
Take your book, your hymnal, and turn to page 475. Please stand with us.